Well, good evening, everyone. This is Mary Agnes Antonopoulos, and we're very excited that you're here for this wonderful webinar. Dr. Mache Seibel is one of America's leading experts on women's health and menopause and the founder of My Menopause magazine in the Apple newsstand, which is a fantastic resource not only focused on menopause and women's health, but also on women's health itself. Dr. Mache is a member of the Harvard faculty for nearly 20 years and is currently a professor at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. Dr. Seibel has published or edited 15 books and over 200 articles, and he is consistently listed in Best Doctors in America. You can find out more about him at his website at drseibel.com, and I'm going to spell that for you if you grab a pen. That's www.drseibel.com.
Thank you, Mary Agnes. Thank you very much for all of your help. And first of all, I want to thank all of you for joining me here this evening. There was a lot of interest in this webinar last Thursday, and it filled up within 10 minutes of getting started. And that was really exciting, and it shows how important this information is. But what it also meant is that many of you were locked out of the webinar, and I really want you to get the information you want and need. And I know a few of you are attending primarily to get information on the 4-part Optimize Your Menopause series I'm going to tell you more about later in the webinar. So let me just tell you about that in case you're one of those people and you want that information now or you have to leave early. It's really simple. There's a button on the left of the slides that says register for my 4-part webinar series, and you can click that whenever you're ready if you want to participate in those seminars. But we'll talk more about that later. Tonight we're going to discuss a lot of powerful health information because I want to provide you with an opportunity to address some of your most pressing questions to help you live a more healthy, happy, and vibrant life. And what I think is great about the webinar is I'm going to tell you the answers to questions that I'm commonly asked to help you deal better with or to help you overcome 4 of the most worrisome areas of the transition from your reproductive years into perimenopause, into menopause, and then beyond. Because I will tell you, in this changing healthcare environment, I really believe that health information is one of the most valuable things you can acquire today. And getting it from someone like myself who spent 3 decades teaching it is quicker and faster than most of the other ways of getting it. So in this webinar, I'm going to provide you with an overview that's going to help you begin to reevaluate your current activities, because I want to give you a new way to look at the things you do in these 4 important areas of your life. I really feel like this webinar is a much watch for you, and it's a great opportunity, and I really want to thank you for being here, and I want to congratulate you on your journey. So let's jump in right now, and let's get started, and I hope you can all see these slides. What I want to tell you about is that being overweight is a question that I have had to deal with personally. And this is a picture of myself as a toddler. Picture standing in front of Sears and Roebuck at age 2.5 years old in an overcoat in winter in front of one of those big picture windows where they show the, they have the Christmas decorations. And that picture was shot by a photographer who put it in the front page of the local paper where I lived. And on the top of it, the caption was, "Mighty Mite, the fattest kid in the county." So at 2.5 years old, for me, weight was a very, very big issue. And I really understand how big a deal that is because I had to go to one particular department store. I had to go visit Mr. Galashaw in the back where the boys had their husky pants, and eventually they had their Boy Scout pants as they got a little bit older because they had pleats in it. And I really began to understand the importance of this. And juxtaposed to that, the picture of myself in People magazine from about 10 years ago or so, story where they featured me for helping some gorillas get pregnant at the Franklin Park Zoo. See that my weight now is at an ideal body weight. And really what I learned is that there is a very specific way to do things once you know what to do. And what I hope to do this evening is I want to try and break down for you the things I've learned, and so you know how to do what you need to do. And I think that's really very important, because I think we're all going to have to be more and more advocates for ourselves. My advice to you is to find out what works for you. I've helped over 10,000 women now over the past 30 years, and I can tell you that so many of the women that I've taken care of come in and they just tell me there is just nothing that I can do about any of these things. They say it's just part of aging, and I just have to deal with it. And of course, aging is inevitable, and we can't reverse that. But you can take steps to anticipate things, to prepare for change, to delay things, and to optimize your transition so that your experience is the best it can possibly be. I think personally that the most important thing to realize is that you're not helpless. You're not without options. You are not destined to some predetermined outcome. And most importantly, you are not alone. Many of the women who did what I'm teaching in this webinar were able to ease their transition into menopause, or to lose some of their belly fat, diminish sexual pain and discomfort, and take HRT, or hormone replacement therapy, with confidence and the knowledge they were making a great choice for themselves. Or occasionally, they would be better served not taking estrogen and at least feel confident with that decision. And that's what we want to try and begin to accomplish this evening. So all those myths that you've been listening to, the statements like menopause is miserable, or I'm going to get fat, or sex goes to hell after menopause, or estrogen is too dangerous to take, just forget them. Don't listen to them. Because what is the absolute truth for one person may be absolutely not true for you. And the key is really to understand yourself and to understand the latest and best information so that you can decide what's best for you. Not generally true, or not true for someone else, but what's best for you. So let's get started with some of the more specifics about these 4 areas that we're going to cover. We're going to be talking about changes during the change, weight gain after 45, better sex after 50, and the 4th one, estrogen, no estrogen, alternatives to estrogen. So let's begin with the discussion of changes during the change. First, I want to talk a little bit about the lingo, because I think the names are still a little bit confusing, and the terms, medical terms, are always confusing to people. But menopause comes from the Greek word meaning month and cessation, so it's basically the end of periods. Postmenopause refers to all the years beyond menopause. So once you go through menopause, postmenopause is after that. Premature menopause means that it occurs before age 40. And I realize that this seems astounding to some people, but I will tell you that every year I see 1 or 2 women in their 30s, occasionally in their 20s, who come in, particularly a young woman who come in her 20s, and she'll have some irregular periods or something's wrong, and she wants to know what's wrong. Why are her periods off? And the evaluation will result in showing that she's in menopause. And the thing about it is if you've finished your childbearing, well, it's still upsetting for a young woman, but if you haven't finished childbearing, it's particularly upsetting because people feel as though not only are they thrown into another phase of life, but of course they haven't had a chance to build their families, and that's really important. Now, perimenopause means literally around, just like perimeter means the distance around something. Well, perimenopause means around menopause, and it's really up to 10 years that leads up to menopause, plus 1 year after your last menstrual period. So menopause is really 1 year after your last menstrual period, and perimenopause is like all that window, the 10 years before. And so if you think about it, why this is really important in a lot of ways is because, and we'll talk more about this later, is that the things that you notice in, say, going through menopause, they don't start all of a sudden one day at age 51. They are going to start long before that. And one of the things that's amazing is that although women live much longer now, matter of fact, you're going to live now about a third of your life after menopause on average, the age of the natural menopause hasn't changed much ever. The difference is that if you go back to 1900 and you start looking at how long people lived, the mean age that women lived at that point was about age 48 years old. So if people go into menopause on average, a mean of 51.4 years and a mean of 48 years they were dying, many women never went into menopause, and it was basically not an issue. But the normal range is between 40 and 55 years of age, and it generally occurs because of one of three reasons. So these are how you get to menopause. One is the natural or spontaneous menopause, which is when a woman's ovaries naturally run out of eggs, and that leaves too little estrogen. And when you think about it, a woman, when she's born, is going to have about something on the order of 700,000 eggs. I mean, this enormous amount of eggs in her ovaries. And by the time she gets, or 7 million eggs, 7 million eggs. And by the time she gets to her, to puberty, she's going to have about 400,000 eggs. And so then every month, about 20 or 30 of those eggs come forward. One of them gets selected, and that has the potential for pregnancy. But when those eggs run out over a 30-year window or so, well, then when the last eggs are gone and there are no more, then the woman is in menopause. Surgical menopause is when the ovaries are removed. And then induced menopause is from something in which there's something that happens to cause menopause, such as a woman goes through radiation treatment, or she goes through chemotherapy, or she has a disease of her ovaries that destroys them. So that would be induced menopause. So I wanted to show this very clearly because this is one of the things that's most confusing to women, I think, to people to understand. So we have the uterus, the tube, and the ovary, the other tube and the ovary. So if the uterus is removed, this is called a hysterectomy. Now, if you have a hysterectomy, that means that you're not going to have any more periods, but doesn't mean you're in menopause. And the answer is no. It has nothing to do with menopause. You don't have a period, but if you're premenopausal, if you're a woman, say, in her 30s or 20s or even 40s, and you're still having periods, you have a hysterectomy, but your ovaries are left in, then you're not in menopause. On the other hand, if your ovaries, not one, but both ovaries are taken out, then all the eggs are gone. All the estrogen production is gone. And that's called a bilateral oophorectomy. And so even if your uterus is left in, if your ovaries are removed, you're in menopause. And you may hear terms like supracervical hysterectomy, and when that is this is the cervix, this area here. And if you take the uterus out above the cervix, that's called a supracervical hysterectomy, and that's a term that you may hear, and the same would apply in terms of whether it's menopause or not. Now, when it comes to the symptoms of menopause and perimenopause, one of the things that I certainly hear often, and it doesn't matter what the age of the woman is, if she's going through menopause, and you've probably heard this, either thought this yourself, or you have heard your mother, your sister, your friends say, what is happening to my body? Because all of a sudden, you take an active woman who's juggling her work, and she's managing the household, she's carpooling the kids, and she's dealing with her family, she's dealing with her partner, and all the social life, and then all of a sudden just everything is different. And so a woman may be waking up in the middle of the night with heart palpitations, and she may go see a cardiologist because she thinks she's having some heart problem. Or she may be very anxious and depressed, and she may go see a mental health professional because she thinks something is going on there, but it's not that. Or she may be exhausted or irritable, a short attention span, or a shorter fuse, and she may go see her internist or go see somebody else. Or mood swings and headaches and memory loss, see a neurologist. All of these things can be symptoms of menopause and perimenopause. This is an interesting quote from Oprah, who is certainly a knowledgeable woman about her health and her body. And if you look down here, Oprah was talking with her personal trainer. They were out for a morning run. And she says, I was running and I mentioned these palpitations to my trainer. And he said, I think it's the big M. And she said, the big M what? And he says, I think it's menopause. And she says, I stopped and stared at him. She said, of course it's not menopause. I'm still having periods, regular as rain. And you see, that's the deal. It doesn't have to be an irregular period. Periods may get a little bit lighter to begin with. They may then get shorter. They may get further apart after that. That's the typical pattern, but it doesn't always have to happen that way. And as you can see up above, about half of women seeking medical help for early symptoms are going to be given a sedative or medicated for anxiety. Of course, if you're not sleeping very well and you're having many of the other symptoms, people are going to have poor memory, they're going to be having anxiety, and they're going to feel poorly. A lot of this has to do with fluctuations in hormones. And during perimenopause, during that 10-year window, estrogen levels are plunging and they're soaring, and it's like a roller coaster ride. That's really what's happening. And typically what happens is during the reproductive years, from puberty until perimenopause, the hormones estrogen and progesterone are really synchronized. It's like figure skaters. They are working together in perfect synchrony to create a lining that's going to implant and allow implantation of an egg. And if it fertilizes, it'll be able to sustain a pregnancy. And then what happens is perimenopause comes into play. What ends up happening is these two hormones, estrogen and progesterone, instead of being synchronized, they end up just being independent of each other. They just both do their own thing, and that affects every part of your body. And progesterone has as its primary role to stabilize the uterine lining so an embryo can implant. So that's what the word progesterone really stems from. It's progestation. And progesterone also plays a role in a woman's moods because it attaches to the same sites in the brain as the neurochemical gamma-aminobutyric acid, and GABA, which is a hormone that helps reduce anxiety, is soothed with progesterone. So all of these low levels that happen as a result of poor ovulation and poor progesterone production play a major role in the mood swings, and also are part of the reason why pregnancy begins to be more of a challenge. It's really, in my perspective, very much like puberty, but only backwards. And if you think about what happens when you think back to when you went through puberty, you went from being not able to get pregnant, and then you went through puberty, you were able to get pregnant. You went from not having periods to having periods. You went through a window where your breasts were changing. You went through a window where your body's curves were changing. You went through a window where your mood and your skin was changing. Every part of your life was in a transition. And what happens hormonally at the other end of reproduction is there's almost a reversal of the same things. So you go from being able to get pregnant to not being able to get pregnant. You go from having periods to not having periods. You have body changes in how your breasts are and how your abdomen and the curves of your body are. And you have all these same changes for some women in headaches and skin and mood and all the other things that happen. And so that is very typical, and that's what's happening hormonally. And as I mentioned before, the periods typically lighten, then get closer, and then get farther apart until eventually they stop. But they don't usually go 1, 2, 3 like that. They may go in any particular order, although they typically go in the way I just mentioned. And the good thing is as distressing as perimenopause can be, it's only temporary. And in general, one of the common questions women ask is, how long is this thing going to last? The average age of duration for this, or the average duration of time it lasts, is about 3 years. It would be unusual to be 1 year, and it would be unusual to be 10 years, although I have patients who have been symptomatic for 10 years and some even more. But the mean, the bell curve is at 3 years. And these are some of the many kinds of symptoms that you may experience, or that a woman would experience at this point in time. And they're listed not in priority, but just alphabetically. But you can see, just as in puberty, acne, anxiety, backache, bloating, breast tenderness, crying, depression, changes in hair on the top of your head or on your face, and so many other things that happen. So this is, the good thing is most people don't have all of these things, but most people do have some of these things. And that's why it's so hard sometimes as you're in this transition, thinking which doctor should I go to. And many times what it is perimenopause, and it's something to talk with your gynecologist about to get some relief from those symptoms. Well, I want to move now into weight gain after 45, because this is another very common thing. I mean, one of the common things that women will complain about is, I'm having a little bit more of this belly fat, and I'm gaining weight, and I want to talk a little bit about why that happens. And part of it has to do with the absolute change in metabolism that occurs during this window of time. As a matter of fact, every decade that you live, your metabolism is going to slow down. And actually, it's going to slow down by about 4 to 5% every decade. And so eventually, by the time you're in your late 40s and 50s, your body is actually going to need about 50 fewer calories every day than you did in your 40s, not to gain weight. And the reason this is important is because I have so many times people will come in, a woman will come in and she will say, I don't understand it. I'm eating exactly what I have been eating for the last 10 years, and now I'm gaining weight. That's correct. If you eat exactly the same amount of food as you always have, and you age a decade, your body is not going to be able to burn it up, so you will gain weight. So that means that it's really important to start eating healthy and controlling the calories that you eat, and to keep exercising as an ongoing daily or weekly ritual, because one of my favorite expressions is, you cannot cram for life. You have to take life a day at a time, a week at a time, a month at a time, a year at a time, and being mindful of this will be very helpful for you. It's very complicated, the weight gain, and newer studies are showing now that even if you eat the same number of calories, and you take two groups of people, and you give them the same number of calories, and you give each group the same percentage of protein, fat, and carbohydrates, but you alter the composition of the fats and the carbohydrates, the one that's eating the more whole grains, the more that's eating the more fruits and vegetables and whole foods, is going to control their weight better than the group eating the same composition and the same number of calories, but eating fast foods or processed foods or other kinds of foods where absorption is different. So it's a very complex field, and new information is coming out all the time. So we're not going to have time to go through all of these reasons for weight gain, but I do want to talk about there are many reasons people gain weight. And I think one of the parts of weight gain and weight loss is that the reason people gain weight is different. Not everybody gains for the same reasons, and I think understanding those reasons is helpful in trying to lose weight. And one of the big issues today in gaining weight has to do with stress and anxiety. And it's really unfortunate, but we live in a very stressful society. People are trying to hold down extra jobs. People are trying to take care of their children. They're trying to take care of their aging parents. They're trying to deal with the financial issues. They have so many things to juggle. And the world seems a lot more scary today. There's always something going on that's a disaster here or there. People are chronically stressed. And our body developed a reaction to stress thousands and thousands of years ago, when the purpose of stress was if we were attacked by an animal or we needed to go and fight to survive, we would have to have a little more blood sugar. Our adrenal glands would rev up. We'd put out more cortisol and more adrenaline. It would give us more blood flow to our muscles, and we would breathe faster, and our heart would pump more blood, and all of those things would happen. And then we would have an increase of the blood sugar to bring energy to our body. And that's good. And then an hour later, that would go back down to normal. But today, people are living like this in a chronic state, in a chronic condition. And so all of this increased adrenal hormones is causing much more blood sugar, which is causing our pancreas to increase much more insulin. And the insulin is the hormone from the pancreas that causes the blood sugar to get into our cells to use for energy. And if we don't need any more energy, it then makes it get stored in our belly as fat. And a lot of it has to do with stress and the chronic anxiety that the country is in. Another one is depression, a very important thing, because we have about 1 in 6 people who are clinically depressed in the country. This is a big problem because people who are obese are 25% more likely to be depressed, and people who are depressed are much more likely to eat more and gain weight. So we have an ongoing cycle of these mood relationships to weight, and then there are all these other, which I can't go into now, but are all part of the process of weight gain. I do want to mention that I have addressed this in part in a book that I wrote called Eat to Defeat Menopause. And my purpose here is not to do anything with the book except to tell you at the end you'll see that there is a recipe here. And if you're interested, you can download that recipe. And if you're interested in the book, there is a link to the book to the left of the slides that is available if you're interested in it. Now I want to talk a little bit about better sex after 50. For most people, issues to do with sexuality is one of the main problems that people come in, and they come in and talk about. It's one of the top things that people changes that people come in to talk about. In one survey, 71% of patients believe that their doctor would either dismiss or just dismiss any mention of a sexual problem. So they were afraid that they would just not be heard and just kind of categorically just forget about that. It's not an issue. They would just be dismissed. But 68% also believed that their doctor would be embarrassed if they were asked a question about sex or sexuality. And that is unfortunate because they were feeling that they were being the nurturer that women often are and protecting their doctor about this. So this is an important factor. 76%, 3/4 of women thought there were no treatments available for sexual problems, and that categorically isn't true. So one of the things that I want to share with you here that I think is really important is to tell your doctor if you have a problem, because if they don't know there's a problem, it's really their job to ask you. It's my job to ask the patient, are you having a problem with the loss of libido or painful sex? But if not, it's your right, it's your privilege, it's your mandate to ask your doctor. tell your doctor at the beginning of your visit, and this is something I think is really important because many times the person waits until the end of the visit. I know one thing that's constant is people are nervous, they're embarrassed, and they wait until the absolute end of their visit to say anything. And just as they're walking out, they say, you know, by the way, I want to talk to you about this sexual problem I'm having. And that's not the time to do it. So let your doctor know if you're having a problem with painful intercourse or loss of desire or changes in the ability to have an orgasm, and talk to him or her about it and let them know. And then when if you can't talk about it then, at least be in a position to have that discussion when you, at a different appointment, and you just make that appointment so that the whole purpose is set up so that you can resolve this problem. Otherwise, it will just remain a problem for you. And believe me, the doctor is either going to help you with the problem or they're going to send you to someone who can help you. And this is a very, very, very important thing for you to do. Now, another thing in this better sex after 50 that I want to talk about is that sexual function problems tend to peak between the ages of 45 and 64. So we have the peak of the problem right in the sweet spot of where perimenopause and menopause intersect. And that is not surprising, really. And in this categorization of the sexual dysfunction, you'll see that there are a number of reasons why. We won't have time to go through all of these because we only have an hour together. But I do want to bring your attention to dyspareunia, this one right here, or pain during intercourse. And the reason I want to talk about that particular one is the fact that painful sex is very, very common. And in fact, it happens that the vaginal tissues after menopause are going to get narrower and they're going to get thinner. And this is a natural process of aging. And as a matter of fact, what ends up happening is that over time, the further out from menopause you go, the more likely that this is going to happen. And at one point, about 10 to 15 years out from menopause, dry vaginal tissue and painful intercourse becomes the most common complaint that women come in with. So it's really common. And the reason for that is as follows, is that during the reproductive years, the vaginal tissue is thick and it's very corrugated. And by that I mean it has lots of folds. And if you ever think about the folds in your socks, if you think about the ribbing in your socks, when you go and put your foot into your sock, you know that you have to stretch it to get your foot in and to get your heel in. And then what ends up happening is that it goes and it begins to allow your foot to go in and your heel hits the bottom, and then you're able to feel the elastic gently come back around your ankle. Well, what happens with the vagina is the tissue is equally distensible, it's equally as pliable, it's stretchy, because think about it, a baby is able to come through the vaginal canal, and at the same time, it's possible during intimacy for the penis, the man's penis, to be held firmly. So that same tissue has this great ability to expand and to contract. And after menopause, what ends up happening is all those folds go away and the tissue flattens and thins. So what happens is it doesn't get any elasticity. So during intercourse, it's only the actual diameter of the diameter of the vaginal opening. And you'll notice that because when you go to the doctor for an exam, even if you're not sexually active, what will end up happening is when the speculum is inserted, the little metal instrument is put in, it's going to be tight, it's going to be uncomfortable and painful. So using estrogen locally or some over-the-counter moisturizers as well, that makes it possible for that tissue to become more elastic. And so if you're having a problem with that in particular, just make sure and talk with your doctor about it, because it can be treated, and it's a very important and simple thing to take care of. So I want to tell you that these problems are so common that about 50% of women in their lifetime are going to say that they have a sexual problem. But in fact, after menopause, that percentage jumps to about 80% of women. So that tells you how common this particular problem is. And the thing about it is that it definitely can be treated. So that's why you have to talk about it. And I don't know if this sounds familiar to you or not, but so many women will say, I'm so uncomfortable, it's just not worth it. But you may also hear, I'm just so disinterested, I'd just rather be shopping. So there's all kinds of things that people say, and all of them can be addressed by talking about it with your healthcare provider and getting the help that you need. One point I want to leave you with in this topic is that this quote I think is very important, is whether you are at work or at home or in a boardroom or the dining room or the bedroom, there's one essential ingredient in getting what you want, and that is asking for it clearly and calmly. And so whether it's with your partner or whether it's with the doctor, making sure that he or she knows what the issues are, you have to ask. And in terms of solutions, again, we can't talk about them all here, but making more time for foreplay. And if something feels good, let your partner know. Make some noise. If their hand is put someplace you don't want it, take their hand and put it where you do want it. But have communication. Vaginal estrogen or some of the over-the-counter products that are available for moisturizing like Replens can be very helpful. But both estrogen and testosterone have an impact on sexual desire and a very positive effect on the brain. And so hormones play a very important role here. And it's really important to talk about this because something can be done most of the time. There's also the issue of sexual relationships becoming disruptive as partners age, because women's sexual drive is different than men. As the book title goes, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and women's sex drive is motivated by a wish for intimacy most of the time, and men's sexual drive is often driven by fantasy and more focus on intercourse and orgasm. And there's also all these other issues that come into play, like a spouse has had a heart attack and is afraid to have sex because it's going to lead to fear of losing a partner, or a spouse the male is given Viagra to help his libido, and in the process overcorrects the problem, and then that leads to a problem with the wife. So all these things need to be talked about, and there's so much more to talk about in terms of the treatments and what to do. I do want to mention to you that because it's such a common issue, I have developed a 6-CD audio series called Better Sex, Better Intimacy, and that is something that if you're interested in it, you can get by clicking. There's a link there to the left of the slides. And I want to mention this is a 6 audio series. So what I've done here is interviewed 6 of the top experts in the country on this particular subject, and I think that it has a ton of really great information in it. So I want to talk now about estrogen, and no estrogen, and alternatives to estrogen. This is without a question one of the most common things that women are asking me about, because it's just so confusing. All the data keeps changing. But you can understand how this happens and why it's so important, because over the years between reproduction and menopause, the level of estrogen in your bloodstream is dropping by 90%. So whatever the values are, say in your 30s, 40s, etc., when you're in menopause, the actual circulating estrogen is 90% lower. So you're dealing with 10% of the level of the estrogen that you used to have, and that makes a huge difference. The other thing is I want to talk about is there's not just one estrogen. There are, in fact, 3 different kinds of estrogen, and they are called estrone, estradiol, and estriol. And I'm not going to go into this here. We'll talk more about that at another time. But I do want to say that when you hear the words bioidentical estrogen, what you are hearing is information about the one of these 3 kinds of estrogens, and they have a difference in their structure, and that's what makes them different from each other. So I just want to point that out to you. And whether you get these hormones in a compounding pharmacy or if you get them in a chain drugstore, if you get a hormone that is bioidentical, you're just saying that you're getting one that's identical to the kind that your body makes. And they are not natural because the only plant these come from is a chemical plant. They are not made in plants that grow in the ground. So they are not natural, but they are bioidentical. And here's a slide of some of the prescription estrogens that you will see. There are hundreds of estrogens out there. Estrogen literally comes in every form you can imagine. There are estrogens that come in pills. There are estrogens that come in pellets that go under the skin. There are estrogens that come in sprays. They come in gels. They come in creams. They come in vaginal rings. They come in so many different ways. These are just prescription ones that are available for the vaginal route of use. The one I want to talk about here, because I want to make sure and discuss this, because I think it's so important, is the fact this one is Vagifem. Vagifem is an estrogen that is like a little pill that is used in the vaginal canal. And the reason that it's gotten a lot of play is because the Vagifem is a tablet that gets very little blood in the circulation. The reason that this matters is because the women who are dealing with diseases like breast cancer, many of them cannot take estrogen. And so when doctors say, okay, there's a lot of dryness in the vagina, there's a lot of pain with intercourse and other things like that, when they take an estrogen cream vaginally, they're trying not to get any into the bloodstream. Vagifem has now been reconfigured so that it's even at a lower dose. And I want you to realize that while it's an excellent product, the dosing of it is now so low that for some women they aren't getting enough to actually get moisturizer in or moisture into their vagina or have a positive effect. So I do want to tell you that you may find yourself doing what many of the patients I see do, is they end up putting another one in or looking for a different kind of estrogen to use. I do want to tell you, though, that all of these vaginal estrogens, most of them are going to get a little bit of the estrogen into your bloodstream, and that's important. So you have to talk with your doctor about it, but just be aware that it may not be enough to help you with the problem that you're dealing with. I want to make sure that I mentioned that there are other hormones that change with menopause, and those include testosterone and androstenedione, but also adrenal hormones, DHEA and DHEAS. And these hormones are both so-called male hormones, but they are found both in men and in women, and they are lower, of course. The androgens are lower in women than in men, and in the men, estrogens are also present, but they are lower than they are in women. So both sexes have the same hormones in different amounts, but if you have your ovaries removed, one of the things that goes away with the removal of the ovaries is about 25% of the production of testosterone. So it's not just the estrogen that goes away. So you have to talk about that with your doctor as well. And the most important thing that I want to say in this before we leave this subject is the fact that if you have any interest in taking estrogen, the data has come out in the last year that's really showing that the most important one consideration for you if you want to use estrogen is to start it as close to menopause as possible. So if you're thinking about taking estrogen, don't wait until you're 60 to find out if, that you think I may want to take it. Talk with your doctor about taking it when you're 50 or whatever time you go through menopause, right in that window or in the years after. That's when it's probably the safest. And this is new data and very important for you to think about. And the thing is that many of you will remember about a little over 10 years ago when the Women's Health Initiative study came out, the so-called WHI, there was a whole discussion about estrogen causing an increased risk of breast cancer, blood clots, strokes, heart attacks, and other things. And the thing that was not clear when they started that study is the fact that the women who got estrogen were between the ages of 60 and 79 years old. So they were really a lot older than the women who didn't get the estrogen. So, of course, the women who didn't get the estrogen were 50 to 59. So the women who are going to be 60 to 79, you expect them to have more problems anyway. And when they look at it by age and compare these things and take that into account, it doesn't turn out that estrogen is as unsafe as was thought in those studies. So again, you have to talk with your doctor about that. I do want to mention the magazine that I founded. It's called My Menopause Magazine, and I'm very proud of this magazine. It's in the Apple newsstand, and the magazine comes out every month. It's formatted for the iPad. If you subscribe to it, the app is free, the first issue is free, and the cost for a monthly issue is $1.99. And with that, you can get really the latest information that is available every month right to your iPad. And the thing that's nice about it is that I'm able to use this magazine in order to put in videos, and I'm able to put in audios as well as really interesting articles. So I do hope you will think about that as a possible resource for you. If you are interested in it and you want to check it out, you can look again to the left of the slides. There's a hyperlink there that says My Meno Mag or Menopause Magazine, and if you click on that, it will take you to the Apple newsstand. So I want to summarize here for you, and what I want you to think about is, do realize your body is changing, but that doesn't mean your life is changing for the worse. Do realize that time with your doctor is limited, but don't be afraid to discuss what you want with your doctor, because asking may be the only way to get what you want and need. You've got to ask. Do realize that many symptoms can occur, but don't think there's nothing you can do about them, because most of those symptoms are treatable. Do realize that your metabolism is going to slow down, but with proper nutrition and exercise and behavioral changes, you don't have to increase your weight. Do realize that changes in desire, arousal, and orgasm are common, but don't think there's nothing you can do about it. And do realize there are potential risks of taking estrogen, but don't be afraid to find out your personal risk, to find out if estrogen is right for you, because now a lot of more people can take estrogen, and if not, there certainly are alternatives to consider, both prescription and non-prescription. Well, I hope that you found that this was valuable for you, this webinar, and that you learned something new. because my goal was really to teach you an overview of how you will change and some things that you can do about it in these 4 major areas of menopause. And I know an hour is a short time to cover all the information, but it's the time that we had, and I wanted to give you something that would get you started in reframing your life and your experience in menopause. But if you want to take your learning to another level and you'd like me to teach you, I do want to tell you about a new program that I've developed to help you, and I'd like to invite you to register in my new program called Optimize Your Menopause. And in that 4-part webinar series, I'm going to have the time to really dig into each of the 4 topics that we've touched on tonight. And at the end of each of those 4 webinars, we're going to incorporate time to answer your questions, because I think that's really important and something we just couldn't possibly do tonight and keep this only an hour. And I'm going to ask you to email those to me so that you can get the information that matters most to you personally. Now, the benefit of this 4 webinar series is I really will have the time to really provide you a lot more in-depth information so that you can learn even more about your options. And I want to tell you more about what questions to ask your doctor, because I think that's really important to go prepared. And I'll also have time to explain several more treatment options for you to consider. And one of the things that you'll benefit from most is the chance to ask me your questions in a way that's not embarrassing or scary to you. Because one of the things I know is that people are both afraid and they're embarrassed. And I think those 2 things prevent many women from asking questions and really getting the information that they want and need. And I'll also provide you with a video of each webinar within 48 hours of the live event, so you can have the information and you can review it whenever you want. And the dates are on the website, and the recordings will be available if you can't be there. And the first webinar is going to discuss the transition into menopause in a lot greater depth. We're going to discuss how you know you're in menopause or in perimenopause. And think about it, it's a 10-year window. And there are things that you can be doing along the way to reduce your symptoms. And then there's preventive measures that you should be taking to stay well in menopause and beyond. And I want to share with you the kind of approaches that I use when patients come in to see me. And in the second webinar, I'm going to cover several of the most widely used weight loss approaches, and I'll provide you with strategies for changing your behavior and your diet so you can best control your weight. Because I believe the more you understand why you're gaining weight, the easier it will be for you to lose weight. And this is something that isn't talked about enough in terms of helping people control their weight. In the third webinar, we're going to go over step by step how to take estrogen, what regimens to consider, and we're going to discuss prescription and non-prescription alternatives to estrogen. And if estrogen is something you either can't or you don't want to take, I'm going to share with you which supplements I found work best and which ones are less effective. In the fourth webinar, we're going to talk a lot more about better sex after 50. We'll talk about you, we're going to talk about relationships, and we will talk about a framework to get more sizzle back into your sex life. The price of each hour-long webinar is $57, or you can register for all four for only $197. To put this in perspective, you won't have to buy any books. You won't have to go out and try and find this information. You'll be getting 4 hours of my time and expertise in distilling all this information down for you, so you'll be prepared for your own, on average, 8-minute office visit. And you're going to be sure that you get the care you need by having already learned and processed the information in advance. Because remember, we're going to provide you with a video of each webinar within 48 hours of the live event, so you can have that information to review whenever you want. Again, the dates are on the webinar, and the recordings will be available if you can't be there. I do want to offer to you, as a special thank you for registering for my upcoming Optimized Menopause webinar series, a free copy of my cookbook, Eat to Defeat Menopause, which has a foreword by Dean Ornish, Dr. Dean Ornish. And in that book, you're going to get 60 pages of really helpful menopause health information and a total of 130 recipes from myself and from my co-author, Red Hot Mama's founder, Karen Giblin. as well as recipes from some of America's top chefs that were designed just for you. And it has some of my favorite recipes, which you're going to love those recipes. We prepare them all the time in my home. My primary interest here is really to provide you with some really important health information at an affordable price so it's accessible to the largest number of people. But if for some reason that you are not feeling that you're not learning information to help you, if you let me know within 30 days of registering, I'll be happy to refund your money. So as I mentioned at the beginning of our webinar, we had many more people sign up than our room capacity for the webinar, and based on the platform I use, the webinar series registration is limited now to 100 people. So do sign up quickly, and based on this webinar, I do expect it to fill up. I want to tell you that I want to make sure, I think this issue of having your questions answered is very important, and I do understand that. So as an extra thank you for signing up now for my Optimized Menopause 4 webinar series, I'm going to include a 5th webinar free. And in webinar 5, I'm going to answer the questions that we really couldn't finish during the 4 webinars and any new questions that you think of between now and those seminars. So I want to thank you again for joining us here tonight. I really look forward to working with you and to helping you optimize your menopause. And if you look to the left of the slides, there's a little rectangular button there. And if you click on the register button right now, it says register for the 4 webinar series. If you click on that right now, you'll ensure that you get in and you get your bonuses. And remember, it's risk-free. So I want to thank everyone for spending time with me tonight, and I hope you have a great night.